Keisha Williams never thought moving to a quiet neighborhood would turn into the biggest challenge of her life. After spending 12 years in the military, including 3 tours overseas with special operations, she was ready for peace. She had saved enough money to buy a nice house in Riverside Heights, a beautiful community with tree-lined streets and well-kept homes. The moving truck arrived on a sunny Tuesday morning in March. Keisha stood in front of her new 2-story house, watching the movers carry boxes from the truck. She smiled as she looked at her new home. It had a small front porch, a 2-car garage, and a backyard perfect for the vegetable garden she had always wanted to grow. Mrs. Johnson, her next-door neighbor, walked over with a plate of homemade cookies. She was a sweet elderly woman with gray hair and kind eyes. "Welcome to the neighborhood, dear," Mrs. Johnson said warmly. "I hope you'll be happy here." "Thank you so much," Keisha replied, accepting the cookies. "This seems like such a wonderful place to live." "Oh, it is," Mrs. Johnson said, then her voice dropped to a whisper. "Just be careful with the new HOA. People, they've been acting strange lately." Keisha raised an eyebrow. "Strange how?" Mrs. Johnson looked around nervously. "They've been going around checking everyone's homes, writing tickets for silly things. My friend got a fine because her garden gnome was supposedly the wrong height." Keisha chuckled. "Well, I'm sure it's nothing I can't handle. I've dealt with much worse." Mrs. Johnson patted her arm. "I'm sure you have, dear. You seem like a strong young woman." Over the next few days, Keisha began settling into her new routine. She woke up early each morning, went for a run through the neighborhood, and spent her days unpacking and organizing her home. The house was coming together nicely. She had set up her home office where she would start her new job as a security consultant. On Friday afternoon, while she was painting her living room, the doorbell rang. Keisha wiped her hands on a towel and opened the door. A man in his late 30s stood on her porch, holding a clipboard. He was wearing a white polo shirt with a homemade badge that read, "Riverside Heights Security." "Good afternoon," he said with a fake smile. "I'm Brad Peterson, head of neighborhood security. I'm here to conduct your new resident inspection." Keisha looked at the man carefully. Something about him didn't feel right. His badge looked like it was made at home, and his shirt was wrinkled and unprofessional. "I wasn't aware that new residents needed inspections," Keisha said politely. "Can you show me the official paperwork for this requirement?" Brad's smile faded slightly. "Ma'am, this is standard procedure for all new residents. I need to check your home to make sure it meets our community standards." "I understand you might have community standards," Keisha replied calmly, "but I'll need to see official documentation before allowing anyone into my home." Brad's jaw tightened. "Look, lady, I'm trying to be nice here. This inspection is mandatory. You can either cooperate or we can make this difficult for you." Keisha felt her military training kick in. She recognized the tone of someone trying to use fake authority to intimidate others. She had seen it many times during her service, and she knew how to handle it. "Sir, I appreciate your concern for the community," she said in a calm but firm voice, "but I won't be allowing any inspections today. If you have official HOA business, please have your board send me the proper paperwork." Brad stepped closer to the door. "You don't understand how things work around here. We don't tolerate troublemakers in this neighborhood. And I don't tolerate people who try to bully their way into my home," Keisha replied, not backing down an inch. Brad stared at her for a long moment, then scribbled something on his clipboard. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you." He turned and walked away, but not before giving her house a long, threatening look. That evening, Keisha called the official HOA office number she found in her welcome packet. The woman who answered sounded confused. "An inspection?" "No, dear, we don't do inspections for new residents. That's very strange. Can you describe the man who came to your door?" After Keisha described Brad, the woman sighed. "Oh no, not again. That man isn't with our official HOA board. He's been causing problems for months. We've reported him to the police several times, but he keeps showing up in different neighborhoods." "What exactly has he been doing?" Keisha asked. "He and his friends have been pretending to be official HOA representatives. They write fake tickets, demand money from residents, and threaten people who don't comply. They seem to target people they think won't fight back. Keisha felt a familiar anger building inside her. She had spent years fighting to protect people from bullies and criminals, and now she had encountered them in her own neighborhood. "What can I do about this?" she asked. "Document everything," the woman advised. "Take pictures if they come back, record conversations if possible, and call the police immediately. We're working with law enforcement to stop these men, but we need residents to report every incident." Over the weekend, Keisha noticed more strange activity in the neighborhood. She saw Brad and two other men walking around, taking pictures of houses and writing notes. They were particularly interested in homes owned by people who looked different from the majority of residents in the area. On Sunday morning, she was watering her plants when Mrs. Johnson hurried over, looking upset. "Keisha, dear, they came to my house yesterday," she said, her voice shaking. "Those fake security men. They said my flower boxes were too colorful and that I needed to pay a fine or they would report me to the city." "Did you pay them?" Keisha asked, already knowing the answer from the worried look on her neighbor's face. "I was so scared," Mrs. Johnson admitted. "They were so aggressive, and I'm an old woman living alone. I gave them $50 just to make them go away." Keisha put her arm around her neighbor's shoulders. "Mrs. Johnson, you don't owe them anything. They're not real security officers, they're scammers who are stealing money from people in our neighborhood." "But they had badges and official-looking papers," Mrs. Johnson protested. "Anyone can make fake badges and papers," Keisha explained gently. "Real HOA representatives don't demand cash payments on the spot, and they don't threaten elderly residents." That afternoon, Keisha decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to get a better sense of what was happening. She noticed several homes with people of different backgrounds had received official-looking notices taped to their doors. The notices were full of spelling errors and demanded immediate payment for various violations. As she walked past the community center, she overheard a conversation between two women. "I don't understand why they keep targeting certain families," one woman said. "The Williamses have the nicest lawn on the block, but they got 3 violation notices this week." "It's not about the lawns," the other woman replied quietly. "Haven't you noticed the pattern? They only bother families that don't look like Brad and his friends." Keisha felt her stomach tighten. She had hoped that moving to a quiet suburban neighborhood would be different from some of the places she had served overseas, where corruption and intimidation were common problems. But it seemed that bullies existed everywhere, even in places that looked peaceful on the surface. That evening, she sat in her living room, thinking about her next steps. She could report the incidents to the police, but she knew that would only solve part of the problem. Brad and his friends were counting on people being too scared or too busy to fight back. They were using fear and fake authority to control and steal from their neighbors. Keisha had spent her entire adult life standing up to people who used power to hurt others. She wasn't about to stop now, especially not in her own neighborhood. But she also knew that she needed to be smart about how she handled the situation. Acting alone could be dangerous, and she needed to make sure she had evidence and support before confronting these men directly. As she prepared for bed, Keisha made a decision. She would not be intimidated by Brad Peterson and his fake security patrol. She would protect her neighbors and her community just like she had protected her country. But first, she needed to gather more information and prepare for what was sure to be a confrontation. Little did she know that Brad and his friends had already decided that she was their biggest problem in the neighborhood, and they were planning to make her an example for anyone else who might think about standing up to them. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything for everyone involved. The next morning would bring new challenges, but Keisha Williams was ready for whatever came her way. She had faced much worse enemies in much more dangerous places, and she had never backed down from a fight when innocent people needed protection. 3 weeks had passed since Keisha moved into Riverside Heights, and the situation with the fake security patrol had only gotten worse. Every day brought new stories from neighbors who had been harassed, threatened, or scammed by Brad Peterson and his crew. Mrs. Johnson had become too afraid to tend her garden, and the Williams family down the street had started keeping their children inside after school. Keisha had been documenting everything. She took photos of the fake violation notices, recorded conversations with affected neighbors, and even captured video of Brad and his men walking around the neighborhood with their homemade badges. She had reported everything to the real police, but they said they needed more evidence to make arrests. On a warm Thursday morning, Keisha was in her garage organizing boxes of her military gear that she hadn't unpacked yet. She had decided to set up a small workshop area where she could work on projects and maybe restore some old furniture she had picked up at yard sales. She was wearing an old army t-shirt and jeans, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, when she heard footsteps on her driveway. Looking up, she saw 3 men approaching her garage. Brad Peterson was in the middle, flanked by 2 other men she had seen around the neighborhood. One of the other men was Mike Torres, a heavy-set guy with a goatee who always wore sunglasses, even on cloudy days. The third man was Kevin Walsh, thin and nervous-looking, who seemed to follow the other 2 around like a lost puppy. "Good morning, Keisha," Brad said with a fake smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I see you're finally getting settled in." Keisha straightened up and wiped her hands on a shop towel. "Good morning, can I help you with something?" "Actually, yes," Brad replied, pulling out his clipboard again. "We're here to conduct that mandatory inspection we discussed. Since you refused to cooperate before, we're going to have to insist this time." "And I'm going to have to decline again," Keisha said calmly. "As I told you before, I'll need to see official documentation from the real HOA board before I allow any inspections." Mike Torres stepped forward, his hand resting on something attached to his belt. "Lady, you're not hearing us clearly. This isn't a request anymore. We have the authority to inspect any property in this neighborhood for code violations." Keisha glanced at what Mike was touching and felt her heart rate increase slightly. It looked like a taser attached to his belt, partially hidden under his shirt. Her military training immediately kicked in, and she began assessing the situation, like she had been taught. 3 men, 1 possibly armed with a less lethal weapon. She was in her own garage with limited exit routes. Her phone was on the workbench behind her, but reaching for it might escalate the situation. She needed to stay calm and try to de-escalate while being prepared for anything. "Gentlemen," she said in her most professional voice, "I understand you believe you have authority here, but I've spoken with the official HOA board, and they've confirmed that you are not authorized representatives. I'm going to have to ask you to leave my property." Brad's face darkened. "You think you're better than everyone else in this neighborhood, don't you? Moving in here with your attitude, thinking you can ignore our rules." "I don't think I'm better than anyone," Keisha replied evenly. "I just believe in following proper procedures and respecting people's rights." Kevin Walsh, who had been quiet until now, spoke up nervously. "Brad, maybe we should just go. She's not causing any real problems." "Shut up, Kevin," Brad snapped. "This is exactly the kind of person who ruins neighborhoods. People who think they can do whatever they want without consequences." Keisha could see the situation escalating. She had dealt with similar confrontations during her military service. Situations where aggressive individuals tried to use intimidation to get what they wanted. The key was to remain calm while being ready to defend herself if necessary. "I'm going to ask you one more time to leave my property," she said firmly. "If you don't, I'll be calling the police." Mike Torres laughed unpleasantly. "The police? Good luck with that. We've got connections with law enforcement. They know we're trying to keep this neighborhood safe from people like you." "People like me?" Keisha asked, her voice remaining level, despite the obvious implication. "Yeah, people who don't respect authority," Brad said, taking a step closer. "People who think they can move into our neighborhood and change how things work around here." Keisha realized that this confrontation had been planned. These men hadn't come to conduct an inspection. They had come to intimidate her, to make her an example for other residents who might think about standing up to them. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said, trying one last time to de-escalate. "I'm not trying to cause problems for anyone. I just want to live peacefully in my home." "Too late for that," Mike said, his hand moving to the taser on his belt. "You've already caused enough problems by filling people's heads with ideas about standing up to us." Keisha's eyes locked onto the weapon as Mike began to pull it from his belt. Time seemed to slow down as her training took over. She had faced Much more dangerous situations than this, but she had never expected to need those skills in her own neighborhood. "You know what your problem is?" Brad continued, apparently unaware that his partner was escalating the situation to a dangerous level. "You think because you're some kind of tough military woman you can intimidate us. Well, we're not intimidated." Mike had the taser fully out now, holding it at his side but ready to use it. "Maybe this will help you understand that we're serious about maintaining order in this neighborhood." Keisha's mind was racing through her options. She could try to retreat into her house, but that would mean turning her back on an armed individual. She could try to talk them down, but it was clear that they had already decided to use force. Her best option was to stay calm and wait for an opportunity to defend herself safely. "Gentlemen, I think you need to consider what you're doing here," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Threatening someone with a weapon on their own property is a serious crime." "We're not threatening anyone," Brad replied with a smirk. "We're just conducting official business. If you get hurt, it's because you resisted a lawful inspection." Kevin was looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Guys, I don't think we should—" "I told you to shut up." Brad cut him off. "This woman needs to learn that there are consequences for not following the rules." Mike raised the taser slightly, pointing it in Keisha's direction. "Last chance, lady. Are you going to cooperate, or do we need to make this unpleasant?" Keisha felt her muscles tense as she prepared to move. She had been in situations like this before, where split-second timing meant the difference between safety and danger. But she also knew that she wasn't alone in this neighborhood, even if it felt like it at the moment. What Brad, Mike, and Kevin didn't know was that Keisha had made some friends since moving to Riverside Heights, not just neighbors like Mrs. Johnson, but some very special friends who had also chosen to settle in the area after their military service ended. 3 houses down, Maria Rodriguez was washing dishes in her kitchen when she glanced out her window and saw the confrontation developing in Keisha's garage. Maria had served with Keisha for 6 years, and she recognized the body language of a situation going bad. 2 blocks over, James Washington was working in his home office when he received a text message from Maria. "Check on Keisha. Now." Around the corner, David Chen was taking a coffee break from his remote work when his phone buzzed with the same message from Maria. All 3 of them had served with Keisha in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. They had learned to watch out for each other, to recognize when one of their team was in trouble, and to respond without hesitation when help was needed. As Mike Torres prepared to use his taser on their friend and former teammate, he had no idea that 3 highly trained individuals were already moving toward Keisha's house, each one taking a different route to avoid being seen. The fake security patrol thought they had cornered one isolated woman who would be easy to intimidate. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. "You know what?" Mike said, his finger moving toward the trigger of the taser. "I think you need to be taught a lesson about respect." Keisha took a deep breath and prepared for what was about to happen. She had trained for situations like this countless times, but she had never imagined she would need to use those skills to defend herself from fake security guards in her own garage. The confrontation was about to reach its peak, and everything that happened next would change life in Riverside Heights forever. Mike Torres raised the taser higher, his finger hovering over the trigger. The yellow and black device looked menacing in the morning sunlight streaming into Keisha's garage. Brad Peterson stood beside him with his arms crossed, a satisfied smirk on his face as he watched what he thought would be an easy victory. "This is your last warning," Mike said, pointing the taser directly at Keisha. "Either you let us inspect this property right now, or you're going to learn what happens to people who don't cooperate in our neighborhood." Kevin Walsh was shifting nervously from foot to foot, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. His hands were shaking and sweat was forming on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Keisha stood perfectly still, her military training keeping her calm, even as her heart pounded. She had calculated the distance between herself and each of the 3 men. She knew exactly how long it would take her to move to safety or defend herself if necessary. But she also knew something that Brad, Mike, and Kevin didn't know. She wasn't alone. Just as Mike's finger began to tighten on the trigger, a calm voice spoke from behind the 3 men. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." All 4 people in the garage turned toward the voice. Maria Rodriguez stood at the entrance to the garage, her hands relaxed at her sides, but her posture showing she was ready for action. She was wearing jeans and a simple blue t-shirt, but there was something about the way she carried herself that immediately commanded attention. "Who are you?" Brad demanded, his earlier confidence starting to waver. "This is official HOA business. You need to leave immediately." "Official business?" Maria asked, taking a step into the garage. "With homemade badges and fake authority? I don't think so." Mike swung the taser toward Maria. "Back off, lady, or you'll get the same treatment as your friend here." That's when a second voice spoke, up from the other side of the garage. "You really don't want to threaten 2 people at once with just one taser." James Washington had entered through the side door that led from Keisha's backyard. He was a tall, solid man with calm eyes and the same confident bearing as Maria. He moved with the easy grace of someone who had spent years in dangerous situations and knew how to handle himself. Kevin Walsh's eyes went wide. "Brad, there's more of them. Maybe we should just go." "We're not going anywhere," Brad snapped, but his voice had lost some of its earlier authority. "These people are interfering with official neighborhood business." "Official?" a third voice asked from behind them. David Chen had appeared at the garage entrance, effectively blocking the exit route that Brad and his friends had been planning to use. He was smaller than James, but moved with the same quiet confidence. In his hand, he held a smartphone that was clearly recording everything. "I've been recording this whole conversation," David said calmly, "including the part where your friend there threatened my teammate with a weapon on her own property." "Teammate?" Mike asked, confusion replacing some of his earlier aggression. "That's right," Maria said, moving closer to the group. "We all served together overseas. We know how to handle bullies who try to use fake authority to intimidate innocent people." The 3 fake security officers suddenly realized they were surrounded. Keisha was in front of them, Maria to their left, James to their right, and David, blocking their exit. None of the 4 military veterans had raised their voices or made any threatening gestures, but their presence had completely changed the dynamic in the garage. "You can't do this," Brad protested, but his voice cracked slightly. "We have rights too." "You absolutely have rights," James agreed. "You have the right to leave this woman's property immediately. You have the right to stop impersonating law enforcement officers. And you have the right to remain silent when the real police get here." "Real police?" Kevin stammered. David held up his phone. "I called them about 3 minutes ago. They should be here any moment." Mike was still holding the taser, but he seemed confused about who to point it at. Every time he moved it toward one person, he had to worry about the other 3. His hand was shaking now and sweat was dripping down his face. "Put the weapon down," Maria said in a voice that was calm but carried absolute authority. "You're outnumbered, you're being recorded, and the police are on their way. The smart thing to do is cooperate." "Listen to her," Keisha added, speaking, for the first time since her friends had arrived. "She's trying to help you avoid making this situation worse than it already is." Brad looked around the garage desperately. His plan to intimidate one isolated woman had completely fallen apart. Instead of facing someone he thought would be easy to bully, he was surrounded by 4 people who clearly knew how to handle themselves in difficult situations. "This isn't over," he said weakly. "You can't stop us from protecting our neighborhood." "Protecting your neighborhood?" David asked, still recording. "By threatening elderly residents like Mrs. Johnson? By scamming families out of money with fake violations? By pulling weapons on homeowners who ask for proper documentation?" "We don't know what you're talking about," Mike said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Really?" James pulled out his own phone and began reading. "Mrs. Johnson paid you $50 for a fake flower box violation. The Williams family paid $75 because you said their mailbox was the wrong color. The Garcias were told they needed to pay $100 because their car was parked in their own driveway." Kevin's face went pale. "How do you know all that?" "Because we've been investigating you," Maria explained. "When someone threatens our friend and our neighbors, we take it seriously. We've documented every fake citation you've issued, every family you've scared, and every dollar you've stolen." The sound of sirens began to echo through the neighborhood. Kevin looked toward the garage entrance with panic in his eyes. "I told you guys this was a bad idea," he said to Brad and Mike. "I told you we were going to get in trouble." "Shut up, Kevin," Brad hissed, but he was looking around frantically for an escape route that didn't exist. Mike was still holding the taser, but his hand was shaking so badly that it would have been impossible for him to use it effectively even if he tried. The weapon was designed to incapacitate one person at close range, but he was facing 4 people who had spread out around the garage in a formation that made it impossible for him to threaten all of them at once. "The smart thing to do," Keisha said gently, "is to put that taser down on the workbench and wait for the police to arrive. Fighting will only make things worse for all of you." "She's right," David added. "We have everything on video. The police will see exactly what happened. Here. If you cooperate now, it will look better when you go to court." 2 police cars pulled into Keisha's driveway, their red and blue lights flashing. Officer Lisa Morgan stepped out of the first car, followed by Officer Robert Kim from the second vehicle. Both officers approached the garage carefully, their hands resting on their equipment but not drawing any weapons. "What's the situation here?" Officer Morgan asked, looking around at the 7 people in the garage. "These 3 men came onto my property claiming to be HOA officials," Keisha explained calmly. "When I asked for proper documentation, they became aggressive and threatening. The man in the middle pulled a taser and pointed it at me." Officer Morgan looked at Mike, who was still holding the taser. "Sir, I need you to put that weapon down immediately and step away from it." Mike looked around the garage one more time as if hoping for a miracle that would get him out of trouble. When none came, he slowly placed the taser on Keisha's workbench and stepped backward with his hands raised. "Thank you," Officer Morgan said. "Now can someone explain to me what's been going on in this neighborhood?" David stepped forward with his phone. "Officer, I have video of the entire confrontation, starting from when they threatened Mrs. Williams with the taser. I also have documentation of their pattern of harassment and fraud throughout the neighborhood." Officer Kim looked at the 3 fake security officers. "Are you gentlemen employed by the official Riverside Heights HOA?" "We're independent neighborhood security," Brad said, trying to sound official. "Independent security requires a license in this state," Officer Morgan noted. "Can I see your licenses and identification?" The 3 men exchanged glances. None of them had security licenses because none of them were real security officers. "We don't exactly have licenses," Kevin admitted quietly. "And your badges?" Officer Kim asked. Brad reluctantly removed his homemade badge from his shirt and handed it to the officer, who examined it carefully. "This appears to be a toy badge with a sticker on it," Officer Kim observed. "Did you make this yourself?" Before Brad could answer, Mrs. Johnson appeared at the garage entrance, breathing heavily as if she had been hurrying. "Officers," she called out, "these are the men who have been taking money from people in our neighborhood. They scared me into paying them $50 last week." More neighbors began gathering outside the garage: the Williams family, the Garcias, and several other residents who had been victims of the fake security patrol had heard the sirens and come to see what was happening. "It looks like we have a lot of witnesses," Officer Morgan said, looking at Brad, Mike, and Kevin. "Gentlemen, you're under arrest for impersonating law enforcement officers, criminal trespass, assault with a deadly weapon, and fraud." As the officers began reading the 3 men their rights, Keisha looked around at her friends who had come to help her. Maria smiled and gave her a small nod. James crossed his arms and watched the arrests with satisfaction. David was still recording everything, making sure there would be a complete record of what had happened. The fake security patrol that had terrorized Riverside Heights was finally being held accountable for their actions. But more importantly, Keisha realized that she had found something she hadn't expected when she moved to this neighborhood. She had found a community of people who looked out for each other, and friends who would always have her back when trouble came calling. The police cars drove away with Brad Peterson, Mike Torres, and Kevin Walsh in handcuffs, their red and blue lights fading into the distance. The crowd of neighbors who had gathered outside Keisha's garage began to disperse, but many stopped to shake hands with her and thank her for standing up to the fake security patrol. Mrs. Johnson was one of the last to leave. She walked up to Keisha with tears in her eyes and gave her a big hug. "Thank you, dear," she whispered. "I haven't slept well in weeks because of those awful men. Now I can finally feel safe in my own home again." "You don't need to thank me," Keisha replied, hugging her elderly neighbor back. "We all deserve to feel safe in our neighborhood." After the neighbors had gone home, Keisha stood in her garage with Maria, James, and David. The four friends looked at each other and then burst into laughter, the tension of the morning finally releasing. "Well, that was more excitement than I expected when I decided to organize my garage today," Keisha said, shaking her head with a smile. "Good thing we all decided to settle in the same area after getting out of the service," James said. "Just like old times watching each other's backs." "Speaking of which," Maria added, "how did you all know to come help?" "I sent a text, but you guys got here so fast." David grinned. "I was working from home and saw those three walking toward Keisha's house with that fake tough guy swagger. Something about their body language told me they were looking for trouble. I was in my kitchen and saw them through the window," Maria explained. "When I saw the one guy reach for something on his belt, I knew it was time to move. And I was just finishing my morning run when I got Maria's text," James said. "I may be out of the Army, but I'm still in good enough shape to sprint 3 blocks when a friend needs help." Officer Lisa Morgan returned about an hour later to take additional statements and gather evidence. She sat in Keisha's living room, with the 4 veterans taking detailed notes about everything that had happened. "Your video evidence is going to be crucial for the prosecution," she told David. "We've been trying to catch these guys for months, but we never had such clear documentation of their activities." "What exactly will they be charged with?" Keisha asked. Officer Morgan consulted her notepad. "Let's see. Impersonating law enforcement. Officers, which is a felony. Criminal trespass on multiple properties. Assault with a deadly weapon for threatening you with the taser. Wire fraud for the fake HOA scam. And we're working with the district attorney's office to add civil rights violations, since they were clearly targeting specific families in the neighborhood." "Civil rights violations?" Maria asked. "We've documented that they primarily targeted families of different ethnic backgrounds," Officer Morgan explained. "The pattern is too clear to be coincidental. The federal authorities are very interested in this case." "What about the money they took from neighbors?" James wanted to know. "We'll be working to recover as much as possible. We've already executed search warrants on their homes and found over $3,000 in cash that we believe came from their fake citation scheme. Every victim will have a chance to file claims to get their money back." 2 weeks later, Keisha received a call from the district attorney's office. The prosecutor, Attorney Rachel Hayes, had good news to share. "All 3 defendants have agreed to plea bargains," she explained. "Peterson is looking at 2 years in state prison plus federal charges. Torres will get 18 months, and Walsh will get 1 year with the possibility of early release, if he cooperates fully with our investigation." "What about restitution for the neighbors they scammed?" Keisha asked. "That's part of the plea agreement. They have to pay back every penny they took, plus additional fines. We've also gotten court orders that prevent them from living in or entering this area of the county for the next 5 years." The news spread quickly through Riverside Heights. Mrs. Johnson baked cookies for everyone who had helped stop the fake security patrol. The Williams family organized a neighborhood barbecue to celebrate. Even people who hadn't been directly affected by the scam came by to thank Keisha and her friends. But the biggest changes were happening at the official HOA level. The real board of directors called an emergency meeting to address what had happened and make sure it never happened again. "We had no idea that people were impersonating HOA officials in our community," Board President Helen Chen told the packed community center. "We're implementing new procedures to prevent this from happening again." The new procedures included official photo identification cards for all legitimate HOA representatives, a telephone verification system for residents to confirm any visits, and a direct hotline to report suspicious activity. "We're also reviewing all of our policies to make sure they're fair and reasonable," Helen continued. "Some of the fake citations these criminals issued were for things that aren't even violations according to our actual rules." 1 month after the arrests, Keisha was working in her garden when a car pulled up to her house. A woman in her 30s got out and walked toward the front yard looking nervous. "Excuse me," she called out. "Are you Keisha Williams?" "Yes, I am. Can I help you?" The woman smiled and extended her hand. "I'm Jennifer Park and I write for the local newspaper. I was hoping I could interview you about what happened with the fake HOA patrol. Your story has inspired a lot of people in other neighborhoods who are dealing with similar problems." "I'm not sure I'm the right person to interview," Keisha said modestly. "I just did what anyone would do when bullies were threatening their neighbors." "That's exactly why people want to hear from you," Jennifer replied. "Not everyone would have stood up to those men the way you did. And not everyone would have had friends who came running to help like yours did." The interview was published the following week under the headline, "Military Veterans Protect Neighborhood from Fake Security Scam." The article described how Keisha and her friends had used their training and teamwork to stop the criminals without anyone getting hurt. The story was picked up by other newspapers and local television stations. Soon Keisha was getting calls from HOA boards in other communities asking for advice on how to prevent similar scams. "I never expected to become some kind of neighborhood security expert," she told Maria over coffee one Saturday morning. "Maybe that's your new calling," Maria suggested. "You could start a consulting business helping communities protect themselves from scammers and criminals." "You know what? That's not a bad idea," Keisha said thoughtfully. "I was looking for a way to use my military experience in civilian life. Helping people stay safe in their own neighborhoods sounds perfect." Within 6 months, Keisha had started her own community security consulting business. She worked with HOA boards, neighborhood watch groups, and local police departments to develop programs that would protect residents from various types of fraud and intimidation. James, Maria, and David all joined her business as partners. Their military backgrounds and the reputation they had earned in Riverside Heights made them popular speakers at community safety seminars throughout the region. "It's funny how life works out," David said during one of their business planning meetings. "We all joined the military to serve our country overseas, and now we're serving our communities right here at home." The fake security patrol incident had become a distant memory for most residents of Riverside Heights, but its effects continued to benefit the community. Property values had increased because people felt safer living there. New families were moving in, attracted by the reputation of neighbors who looked out for each other. Mrs. Johnson had become something of a local celebrity herself. She was frequently invited to speak at senior center meetings about how to recognize and report scam artists. Her experience had shown other elderly residents that they didn't have to be afraid of people who tried to intimidate them. "The most important thing I learned," she would tell her audiences, "is that you're never as alone as criminals want you to think you are. There are always good people ready to help if you just ask for it." 1 year after the confrontation in her garage, Keisha was hosting the annual Riverside Heights Community Barbecue in her backyard. The event had grown from a small gathering to celebrate the arrest of the fake security patrol into a tradition that brought together families from throughout the neighborhood. As she watched children playing on the swing set that James had built, while adults shared food and stories around picnic tables that David had constructed, Keisha reflected on how much her life had changed since moving to this quiet suburban street. She had come to Riverside Heights looking for peace and quiet after years of military service. Instead, she had found a community worth fighting for, and friends who would always have her back. She had discovered that serving others didn't end when she left the military. It just took different forms. The fake HOA cops who had tried to intimidate her with a taser had thought they were dealing with one isolated woman who would be easy to bully. They had no idea they were actually facing someone who had spent her career protecting people from exactly their type of behavior. More importantly, they hadn't realized that true strength comes not from weapons or fake authority, but from the connections we build with the people around us. Keisha's real power hadn't come from her military training, though that had certainly been useful. It had come from being part of a community where people cared about each other enough to come running when help was needed. As the sun set over, Riverside Heights and her neighbors began heading home with full stomachs and happy faces. Keisha smiled and started cleaning up. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to help people, but tonight she was exactly where she belonged, surrounded by the community she had helped to protect and strengthen.